The Gothic revival was a movement mainly in architecture which appeared at the end of the 18th century and gathered momentum during the 19th century, where architects of the day went back to medieval buildings for inspiration for their designs. But it was a movement which wasn't solely confined to architecture, and in particular there was one chap who was called Henry Noel Humphreys, who used medieval sources for the production of books. Humphreys was a book illustrator. He was a fine artist. He had a wide range of interests, including entomology and various other areas of natural history. Numismatics. He was a great coin collector and something of an authority on coins, and wrote a number of books on that subject. But as a young man, he spent time in Rome, where he studied medieval illuminated manuscripts. And inspired by those, he decided to try and reproduce an illuminated manuscript, but using the latest printing techniques. Prior to probably about the 1830s, if you wanted to produce a book which had coloured illustrations, you'd first of all have to print the outline of the image using an engraved plate, and then the image would be hand coloured by a group of artists in watercolours. And such books often were produced with beautiful results, and they're highly prized today. But Humphreys wanted to use the latest printing technology of chromolithography to try and emulate these illuminated manuscripts. And he did pretty much the whole thing. He designed the illuminated text pages, and he then oversaw the printing, and he particularly used metallic inks to try and emulate the gold and silver leaf that appeared on a lot of medieval manuscripts. And the results were, although they look somewhat contrived today, were nevertheless would have been considered quite spectacular in those days. He also used the use of metallic inks in the books that he produced on coins. One of the books he actually made facsimile coins using gold, silver and copper inks, and the coins were then held in little pockets on a thicker sheet that was incorporated into the book. So this was a pretty innovative style, but Humphreys didn't stop there. He also wanted to use his medieval sources for the binding of the book, and he chose the carved wooden board as his starting point. These carved boards did appear on some continental book bindings in the medieval period, but obviously these took an awful long time to produce. It was all produced manually, and Humphreys wanted to find a way of reproducing the same kind of book covers, but using a reproducible method. So he had moulds created into which he compressed a plaster of Paris based material, which also incorporated other things. I don't think anybody has actually worked out the precise nature of the material that was used, but these could be then taken from the mould, and this is an example of exactly the same technique. This isn't actually one of Humphreys' books, but you can see you get a very good idea of the way that the mould produces this sort of ersatz carved wooden binding. and it's repeated on the back and on the spine as well. So these bindings were made in a mould, and some recent work has x-rayed these boards and found that they actually have a metal frame inside them, designed to obviously to give greater strength to what would be a fairly fragile covering. And these types of bindings became known universally as papier mache bindings, although that's something of a misnomer, because although papier mache was used extensively by the Victorians for producing a whole range of objects like trays and boxes and furniture as well, this is a different sort of material. It's a composite material, much heavier than papier mache. That's one of the features of papier mache. It's very light, and these are quite heavy. So clearly there are other materials in that that make up these boards. But Humphreys didn't stop there. He also wanted to use the latest style of putting a book together with the books that he produced. And in 1838, a chap called William Hancock devised a method of binding books using what was a new raw material that was coming into the country as the British colonialism spread into the Far East and into Malaya. We discovered latex rubber, which of course is tapped from rubber trees in Malaya and other countries, and it was previously unknown in this country, and so people wondered what they could do with it. So William Hancock discovered that if he dissolved the rubber latex sheets in turpentine, he could take a group of pages or a group of folded sheets, put them in a press and paint the back with this rubber solution, and he probably put several coats on, and when it was fully dry, he found that all the pages were firmly attached together inside this rubber film, and more importantly, the book opened very nicely. It would open flat because of the flexible nature of the spine. In bookbinding, including heavy plates engraved on quite high quality thick paper, there's always been a bit of a problem for the binder to incorporate those into a book, because although you can oversew them and sew them firmly into the book, they really open nicely. But Hancock's method, which he patented in 1838, solved that problem. So this seemed to be a revolutionary method, and Henry Noel Humphreys was quite happy to adopt this to put his books together. But something unforeseen about this was that over a period of time, the rubber latex decayed and became extremely brittle, with the result that the books produced in this way gradually fell apart. This isn't one of Humphreys' books, but a number of publishers were using the same technique to give give books this medieval feel. Humphreys actually only produced 6 books over a 10-year period, although they involved quite large production runs. He produced probably between 1,000 and 2,000 of each of these 6 books, which are mainly on religious themes, although he also did one on coins and one on aspects of Shakespeare's work as well. So he didn't make an awful lot of money out of this particular style of binding, because although he'd aimed to use techniques for the printing and making these boards, there was still quite a lot of expense involved in producing a book like this, and so he never got very rich out of it. And so the misnamed Papier Mache binding is really somewhat idiosyncratic and has quite an interesting place in bookbinding history, but it was relatively short-lived, and but nevertheless produced really quite a fascinating style of book.